Yeah. Yeah, man.
Bendy and the Ink Machine, Chapter 2. Henry held an axe in his hand as the walking sludge of ink started moving towards him. Henry clutched the axe and stepped back. "Back off!" he shouted as the ink creature continued to slowly walk towards him. Suddenly, the blob stopped and its white mouth made some kind of frown. Hold up. "Henry?" it asked in a deep tone that slowly rose. Henry looked at it dumbfounded. "Bendy?" he asked. The blob's mouth turned into a big, happy grin. "Henry, old pal, where have you been?" Bendy tried running toward him, but tripped in his own ink. Henry watched as Bendy started reincarnating himself into what looked to be a 3D version of him. "Oh boy, doesn't it feel good to be back?" Bendy shouted. Henry looked as his creation was right there, in front of him, walking and talking, actually in his face instead of being on screen. Bendy wiped some dripping ink off him as he curled two parts of the end of his head to make little horns. Bendy fixed his crooked bow tie and shook some ink off his legs. "Whoops! Oh, made a little spill here. Clean up on aisle 4. Bendy shouted as he absorbed all the ink on the floor. Henry walked over to Bendy. "Is this what Joey wanted to show me?" Henry asked. Bendy made a confused look. "Joey Drew? That freako?" Bendy asked. "Bendy, how were you made?" Bendy scratched the top of his head. "I don't know, honestly. One minute I'm a cute cartoon character on screen. Next thing you know, I'm a walking, talking blob thing. Bendy thought for a moment. What do you know? I'm a regular old Frankenstein, eh, Henpin?" Bendy chuckled as he nudged Henry's side. Henry scratched his head in disbelief. This doesn't make sense," he pondered. There was suddenly a large crack and thud from above. Bendy and Henry looked up. "The hell was that?" Henry asked, scared. Maybe a pipe busted?" Bendy asked, unsure of himself. Just then, they heard a big howl and large thumps as well. "Don't tell me," Henry stuttered. "Come on, Hen, up the stairs, here." Bendy led Henry upstairs back to the now inked-up hallway. "Aw, dang, this is too much for me to absorb," Bendy said. Now, as the two walked through the corridors, they noticed that there were some patches of clean wooden floor. "Did you absorb some on your way down?" Henry asked Bendy. "Wasn't me," Bendy said. Suddenly, they both heard loud thumping footsteps and a loud moan. They took cover behind the table and waited for whatever was making those sounds and came out of the darkness. From out the shadows, both of their jaws dropped. Well, Bendy's jaw dropped farther. There stood a reanimated Boris, with the ribcage still wide open. Boris's black tongue was sticking out as he was panting. He looked all around and saw an ink pipe. He rushed over to it and ripped it right off the wall. He started chugging down the ink before stopping and groaning. Boris clutched his chest as some ink that he chugged started falling and spilling out on the floor. Boris's tongue came out again, and he started panting as he lumbered away back into the darkness. Henry and Bendy looked at each other in disbelief. "That's Boris?" Henry asked, shocked. Yeah, that's him alright," Bendy said, shuddering. Henry looked at Bendy with a serious face. "Bendy, we need to get out of here." Bendy looked back at Henry and made a serious face too. Yeah, let's get out of here. And if old Boris comes back, I'll give him the old 1-2. Bendy shouted as his white gloves turned to white boxing gloves. Henry and Bendy shook hands and set off down the hallway. The two were aware that Boris was still lingering somewhere, and his echoing moans could still be heard. As they were walking, one of the ink pipes broke and spilled some ink between them. Before Bendy had a chance to plug it back in, the ceiling caved in on them, separating them.
"Oh, Hen? Oh, y'all alright?"
Ben shouted from the other side. Henry coughed as he wiped some ink off. "Yeah, I'm fine," he said. Henry stood up and looked at the current situation. "Let's try to get back up at the ink machine," Henry called out.
Sounds like a plan, man,"
Bendy shouted, and the two parted and walked towards the ink machine. As Henry was walking, he heard something from behind him. "Ink," it said in a gurgling voice. Henry looked back in fear as he saw a staggering Boris running towards him. "Ink! Ink!" he bellowed. Henry tried to run as fast as he could, but the ink slowed him down just a bit. Luckily, Boris was still too slow, and Henry managed to outrun him and ducked behind a barrel. As Boris turned the corner, he looked at the footprints Henry made and tracked them to Henry's hiding spot. Henry leaned against the barrel as Boris crawled on his knees and reached out to him. "Ink! Ink!" Boris said in a hoarse tone before he retracted his arm and gasped. He staggered backwards and held his throat. "Ink! Ink!" Boris gasped. Henry took this opportunity and made a mad dash out of the room. Boris then got on his knees and started sucking up all the ink off the floor and loudly moaning as some more ink fell out of his chest. "Ink!" Henry, on the other hand, was long gone before Boris had stopped to catch his breath. That was too close," he panted as he continued to walk. Boris tried to track Henry down again, but the constant dripping of ink made Henry's tracks disappear before they were completely covered in ink. "Ink!" Boris groaned as he looked around.
"Are you? Oh boy!"
Bendy shouted behind a corner. Boris walked over to where Bendy was and loomed over him. "Ink?" Boris asked.
"Yeah, I got some ink right here, big guy."
Bendy held out his palm as an ink blot started to form into a black heart. Bendy shoved the heart right into Boris's open chest as Boris yelped loudly. The heart then started pumping, and his open ribcage started patching up. Bendy held up a glass of ink.
"Got ink?"
Bendy said cheekily as Boris gulped down the ink. Boris took a 30-second breather before standing straight up and looked at Bendy. "Bendy?" Boris said as he gave Bendy a big squeezing hug.
"All right, you mutt. Drop me."
Bendy commanded as Boris dropped him on the floor. "I saw the creator. I tried to kill him, but I was just too slow," Boris pouted.
"Aw, relax, buddy. It's not your fault. Besides, there's two of us and one of him.
Bendy started chuckling maniacally.
He ain't escaping nowhere. Not after what he and everyone else did to us."
He shouted as he cackled, and Boris followed and made a goofy dumb laugh. Henry heard Bendy's laugh and remembered that laugh whenever Bendy got a nasty idea. So, the cheeky little devil's back. Henry now made caution to look out for both Bendy and Boris, as he had a feeling that both of them were hunting him down.